Welcome to another episode of the Voices of the Learning Network podcast. This is Bill Banham, your guest host today. And in this episode, we're going to explore what it really means to design the future of work and why learning pros need to be at the center of that conversation. And joining me on the show today is a pretty cool dude, my friend, the awesome Barry Winkless, head of the Future of Work Institute over at the CPL and author of the new book, Future Work World. Barry's work challenges organizations to move beyond reacting to trends and instead take a more intentional, design-led approach on how work gets done. And in his book, he introduces a practical framework built around three lenses, which are workplace, workforce, and work tools, alongside the meta waves shaping how organizations evolve. And so in this episode, listeners, we're going to dig into what all of this means specifically for learning leaders and learning practitioners, how L&D can move from support function to strategic driver, how AI, yes, we're going to have to talk about AI, of course, is reshaping capability building, and how to design learning experiences that actually prepare people and organizations for what's next. How was that, Barry? Did I do a good introduction there?
I think that's a pretty good one. I might use that on myself now, but when I'm introducing myself, I would use that. Let me just speak again. I'm laughing. I'm kind of going, okay. I'm kind of rapidly going, okay, this is for a learning and development audience that are probably way more expert at me than learning and development. So I'll focus on strategy and design. How's that? Because that's my background. So hopefully there'll be some value in my conversation.
Well, we will find out, Barry. We will find out. Let's jump straight in there. So you talk a lot about designing the future work rather than reacting to it, of course. Where do you see L&D leaders fitting into that shift from enablers to designers or of better organizations?
Yeah, I think number one, it's a great question. And again, if I come in it wearing my strategy hat, right, for all intents and purposes, I think, ultimately L&D, I would say, need to move upstream. They need to be right at the start of and involved in the broader business strategy process. And a very, very simple example is if you want to be an organization, let's say one of your core pillars in strategy might be you want to become the most customer-centric organization in your sector, right? It's really important that learning and development professionals are part of that conversation because it's like concurrent engineering, right? If you're really honing in a particular strategic topic and you've got the right core enabling people there, they can actually start designing from that moment in time. Oftentimes you'll find L&D is downstream. And as a strategist, I hate downstream because it just means you have to go through different steps before people are receiving stuff, reacting to it, and then trying to act around that. Now, again, I'm not an L&D expert, but from my perspective is, if we're really serious about creating what I call in the book wisdom worlds, right? Organizations that are constantly switched on, constantly understanding, key skills that they need and how quickly they can acquire them. The more upstream L&D professionals are in that strategic process, the more impactful they're going to be. So coming back to my example of, okay, we want to be really customer-centric, having L&D in there working with you going, what does that mean? What are the skills that make that up? What's our version of being customer-centric? Do we need to train our guys being more like consultants? Do we need to give them some of those consulting skills? And what does that then mean to how L&D then develop those programs of work? So I think for me, it's around two aspects. One is around L&D really being strategic and being part of the actual business strategy, not even just the HR strategy. And then second thing for me then is really having that, I'm going to say it's a big lens, so making sure that lens is big enough to be very holistic in terms of how you're designing these programs. That's one of the reasons I introduced this idea of 3 Ws, because not just thinking about what we often talk about, which is the work task side of things, skilling people up to do the job, but also in terms of the workforce. So who are we designing these programs for? What kind of people are they? But also what way they're working with us. And then finally on the workplace thing, which is around, this virtual, digital, physical mashup, what's the best, portfolio of interventions that make sense for a particular learning type. So long answer, Bill, but hopefully that kind of gets to the heart of your question.
Not a bad answer at all. There's lots of focus, Barry, right now on skills, taxonomies, and capability frameworks. Are organizations over-indexing on mapping skills and under-investing in actually enabling performance?
Okay, hard questions here, Bill. I expected an easier ride on the podcast. So I think if you start with the question around skills, taxonomies, and frameworks, look, it's really important you've got some kind of a framework to hang your hat on, right, in terms of these programs of work. I think the big thing for me, and I use this fictional object in the book where I talk about this idea of the transformation index. I would challenge L&D professionals to ask themselves how truly transformational their L&D programs actually are. So if I was to give them a scale of 1 to 10 to say, okay, how many individuals, teams, and performance outcomes have you actually helped to transform? I think that would shine a very, very different light on some of the skills matrices and programs and all this kind of stuff, we're trying to develop. And they're all very valuable, and I'm not going to diss any of them. We use some of those in our own organization as well. But I think oftentimes we forget about what all of this is about, right? And all of this is really about how we transform the individual, how we transform the organization, and actually more and more how we transform the broader society in which those organizations are actually operating within. I just like this idea of learning and development recognizing actually their transformational potential and then measuring themselves against the transformational potential. I know that sounds hard, but it's actually a really, really cool and exciting way to think about, what people out there do on the L&D side, So strange answer, but, I just like that idea. So for me, it's like designers, strategists, and transformation architects. And I think having that, for me, will actually enable L&D to do more with less. So what are those 3 transformational programs we can do versus the 12 interventions that we're doing? I know all L&D people got to make sure that people are up to skill on, technical skills and safety and all these kind of good stuff. I'm talking about the other stuff, the stuff that drives team performance, that drives the business performance as well,
Barry, I think that's the first time on this show that when I've hosted anyway, that someone's managed to give me an answer which includes solving society's ills. Yeah. You took it to a next level there. Well done.
All right. Yeah, I've gone up in the next up space. No, I got
it. So you've spoken about AI as augmentation rather than. Can you tell me like better? When I'm a Google listener, Barry, you've spoken about AI as augmentation rather than replacement. What does that look like specifically for learning teams, both in how they work and what they deliver?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've had a similar type question and sorry, Bill, I'm not going to challenge you, and I do talk a lot about augmentation, but actually what's more important to me is what I would call, and sorry for throwing in new words as well. So mode and context switching, right? Okay, so you can use that in the bar now. We're talking next over a pint, right? But so for me, it's around what does it make sense? So everybody's having the conversations now. So L&D are like heavy function, right? It's okay, we're doing some low value crap that we need to totally automate, right? Blah, 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 right? We need to do this, blah, blah. I'm not going to talk about that kind of stuff. What I'm more interested in is, using all of these new technologies like AI, what new learning experiences can we actually create, right? So I interviewed a founder of an organization called InsightSphere out of Switzerland, and it was interesting. I was almost looking for her type of business for the book because I had something in my head that this organization kind of represented. And what she's developed is really taken all of the knowledge from all the TEDx talks, from all around the world, right? And created an avatar that ultimately improves your communication in much, much faster time than anything else. And you can do it in a virtual space that might be a virtual representation of, let's say, an exhibition center that you work in, or it might be in a retail center, wherever that works in, right? And for me, that's a great example of, using AI in a way that's really exciting, right? That really brings in new knowledge that you can quickly do 10-minute bites of, and your communication gradually improves and improves and improves, right? And I come back to that transformational piece, right? So if you've got these augmented solutions, utilizing the best of people, knowledge, and AI. And then that rapidly improves your acquisition of knowledge. And let's say, for argument's sake, you want to be, coming back to my example I said at the start, one of those customer-centric, let's say museums, right, in the UK. There's a direct link between you doing this transformational, one exciting communication program and the transformation of the customer experience in that museum, and therefore the transformation of that organization. So I'm really, really interested in L&D people understanding that there is an oscillation between human-based stuff, augmented-based stuff, and fully automated-based stuff. And then we add another layer, and on top of that, we talk about virtual, digital, and physical, right? So all of a sudden, you've got this really cool four-dimensional canvas, I'm going to call it, for creating genuine learning experiences that really can transform in some shape or form. And it's a bit like, I've done a lot of work on the, with people involved in immersive, entertainment and this kind of stuff. And, it's a bit like that. You can look at one thing in one way and say, we have to deliver this program. Or you can say, you know what, we're going to take this program and we're going to turn it into a transformational experience. It doesn't actually take more time. It takes more thinking maybe, and it takes more maybe a narrative-based approach. But the transformational impact of that and the emotional impact of that with the individuals going through that program, it's exponential, right? So I'm really interested, to be honest, Bill, in where AI can take us from a augmented learning perspective, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And then also where virtual space can bring us from a kind of rich experiences, and not just virtual. How do we mix those things together in different ways that are exciting and new, maybe? And I'm a huge believer in this idea of the hero's journey. So can we bring somebody through, an emotional experience, even in a 3-hour learning and development program? So it's much more emotionally resonant to those individuals when they leave that room. And make no mistake about it, I talk about in the book a lot about the systems architect mindset and ideality. So this idea that over time, all of these systems are going to be, more or less, zero time to learn stuff. More or less, you're going to be able to learn stuff by yourself. And more or less, you're going to have access to all of the world's knowledge. That's where we're going. And if we're going there, the role for me of L&D people become more like experience architects, transformational agents, taking the time that's, that they've been freed up to actually look at these things properly and move away from KPIs into more like EPIs, emotional performance indicators. So
you mentioned in that answer, you spoke about the importance of immersive experiences. By the way, I think it's so cool that you did a professional certificate in immersive storytelling over at Columbia College in Chicago. So listeners, Barry really does know what he's talking about here. But let's move on, because we've only got a few more minutes. In terms of building future-ready mindsets, Barry, what are the key mindset shifts that L&D should be prioritizing in leaders and employees today? I'm going to challenge you to answer this one in 90 seconds or less.
Okay. Go. In the book, I talk about 3 mindsets, and it's exactly the same for L&D professionals. So one is the systems architect, so understanding where all this technology is going, all these systems are going, and harnessing the same. Second one is the destination designer, recognizing that whatever program you're developing, whether it's small, medium, or large, global, that you have to purposely design them in exciting ways. Create any initiative like a destination that people want to spend time on. And then finally is a societal whisperer, which is basically understanding the underlying zeitgeists of the populations that you're delivering this L&D for. Is that 90 seconds? I think so. It's not bad.
I think that's the most succinct answer I've ever got out of you, Mr. Winkless. Very good. Okay. Final question.
You did give me the pressure, so
the guy performs under pressure. Last question before we ask you how we can connect with you. From pilots to scaled impact, your book talks about hero projects, pilots and test beds. What advice would you give L&D leaders who want to experiment more but struggle to scale those experiments across the organization? And I'm going to give you a whole 2 minutes to answer.
Oh, wow. Okay. This is the one I can't answer, so no, I'm not joking. Yeah, look, I think the reason I do call it out as hero projects is basically because we're all hearing about pilots, right? It's been a real, kind of word that we've used a lot with pilots. I always say there's more pilots in organizations than Ryanair have pilots flying in the sky at this stage. But I think the difference between a pilot and a hero project, and this is particularly important in global organizations, right? If you're going to run a pilot, it should be a pilot that has broader emotional impact beyond the site that you're working on. Right. And what I mean by that is, if I was going to do a pilot, coming back to my example again, because it's probably useful having that thread through the interview, want to be the most customer-centric organization, and we've identified maybe, next level communication as one of those kind of core skills. That's the thing to focus in on and develop up a hero project that, number one, will really excite people. Now, that is really important. That sounds like nothing. But what you want is, I call it the look over the wall thing. Right. So it's like, oh, what are they doing in there? Right. And to do that, you need to come back to that destination designer mindset. What can we create that really makes this exciting for people? The second thing you need to do then is integrate the latest, whatever we want to call it, thinking, gadgets, technology, processes into that hero project. At least one aspect. So you might do a little bit of an immersive piece. You might do a little bit of an experience design piece, but it's enough that people go, "Ooh, that's really interesting, right? What is that doing?" And then the third thing is it has to be from ground one, totally applicable to other sites in your organization, right? And can be easily transportable. I think that's often the difference between a standalone experiment that frankly gives you a little bit of an ego boost versus something that's much more fundamental and much more transformational beyond the four walls of your site, your area. And then it's around marketing the impact of that once the impact is true and authentic, and marketing that through both the left and right brain lens, right? You're making it emotionally resonant with people whilst also showing the practical impact, of that particular hero project.
Okay, very good. Seconds to spare. Well done. Just finally for today, Mr. Winkler, how can folks connect with you? Is that LinkedIn? Is that email?
Yeah, please do. Look, guys, you know this, Bill. I'm massively collaborative. So Barry Winkler on LinkedIn. Follow the Future Work Institute. And genuine, guys, any ideas or concepts you want to share or touch base, please do.
Rock and roll. That just leaves me to say for today, Barry, you superstar. Thanks very much for joining me.
Thanks, Bill.